Greetings everyone, this is your instructor Audrey, and this PowerPoint presentation is all about setting up your essay. It's basic information from developing your thesis statement to writing introductions, the body paragraphs, and your conclusions. And hopefully you will find this useful throughout the next 8 weeks. You may want to go back and review this if you feel yourself getting stuck on a certain part of writing your essay. I hope to do a number of these throughout the course, and like I said, I hope you can find it useful. So, developing your thesis. This is designed to help eliminate the precariousness of essay writing. So, writing a thesis sentence. A thesis sentence asserts, controls, and structures your entire argument. No sentence in your paper will vex you as much as a thesis sentence, and with good reason. The thesis sentence is typically that one sentence in the paper that, again, asserts, controls, and structures the entire argument. Without a strong, persuasive, thoughtful thesis, a paper might seem unfocused, weak, and not worth the reader's time. The essays that you'll be writing this class, the first one is a personal argument essay. And the thesis statement you write for this essay does have to be persuasive. There's different types of essays, but all of the essays that you will write in this course will be persuasive. You'll be writing argumentative papers. So a good thesis statement makes a claim. It doesn't mean that you have to reduce an idea to an either-or proposition and then take a stand. Rather, you need to develop an interesting perspective that you can support and defend. This perspective must be more than an observation. For example, if I was to say America is violent, that is a simple observation. If I said Americans are violent because they are fearful, that would be more of an argument. Why? Because it has a perspective, a particular perspective, and it makes a claim. Another example I like to use is for students in my 101 class taking on their research papers. A lot of them want to write about things like drunk driving or the legalization of drugs. Drunk driving laws can be complicated. If you wanted to write a thesis statement that said drunk driving is a negative thing, that of course would be hard to argue because most people will agree with that statement. So make sure that you're giving an argument that has a particular perspective and is interesting and one that you can actually argue. There has to be a clear opposition to your thesis. To put it another way, a good thesis sentence will inspire rather than quiet other points of view. One might argue that America is violent because of its violent entertainment industry, or because of the proliferation of guns, or because of the disintegration of the family. In short, your thesis presents something that no one can or would wish to argue with. If it does that, then it's not a very good thesis statement. It needs to be something someone can argue against. Your thesis sentence will also control the entire argument. It is the roadmap for your essay. One reason why developing a thesis statement right away and having that while you write your essay is important is because it will guide you as the writer. Not only will the thesis statement eventually guide the reader to let the reader know exactly what you're going to be discussing, it also keeps you focused as you're writing your essay. And it provides structure for your entire argument. So when you develop your thesis statement, it's always a good idea to go through the checklist. Ask yourself the following questions. Does the thesis sentence attempt to answer a challenging intellectual question? Would the point generate discussion and argument, or is it one that would leave people asking, so what? Always consider that so what question. Is the thesis too vague or too general? Should you focus on a more specific aspect of the topic? You want to narrow down your topic significantly. Most of these papers aren't incredibly long essays. Therefore, you need to consider how much space you have for your argument. You don't want to take on gun control as an issue because that would be too vast of a topic to explore in a shorter essay. Does the thesis deal directly with the topic at hand, or is it simply a declaration of your personal feelings? Does the thesis indicate the direction of your argument? Does it suggest structure for your paper? It's always good to include your main points in your thesis statement. This helps keep you structured while you're writing, and it makes it easier for the reader. The reader will know what to expect, what's coming next. Does your introductory paragraph define terms important to your thesis? If you're writing a research paper, does it place the thesis within a larger ongoing scholarly discussion about the topic? Your introduction should set up your thesis. Consider your audience. What kinds of things do you need to explain for the audience to understand your argument better? Place things in historical context, define terms, things of that nature. Is the language in your thesis vivid and clear? The thesis statement should be the strongest sentence in your entire essay. Of course, you want your essay to be clear throughout. However, you should spend the most time on your thesis statement making sure that it's grammatically correct, it's very clear, and easily understood. And have you shown the relationship between the parts of your thesis? If you present some main points in your thesis, you need to connect those points to your argument and make it easy for the reader to understand. More tips. So a good thesis statement usually relies on a strong introduction. As I said, you should set up that thesis statement. Sometimes you need to go beyond a one-sentence thesis statement. It's fine to write more than a one-sentence thesis statement. It may have to go in 2 sentences. I recommend, as you get started, to place the thesis statement as the last sentence in your introductory paragraph. Use the introduction to explain your argument's points and define the terms, and then save that punch for the thesis statement. The structure of your thesis, along with its introduction, should in some way reflect the logic that brought you to your argument. It's helpful when structuring your thesis sentence to consider for a moment how it was that you came to your argument in the first place. No matter what discipline you're working in, you came to your idea by way of certain observations. For example, perhaps you've noticed in a history education course that female college students around the turn of the century seem very often to write about the idea of service to the community. If you were going to write on that topic, you want to consider, how did you come to that observation? What did you observe first? And more importantly, how did you go about exploring the significance of the observation? Did you investigate other college documents to see if the value of service was stated there? Or was this value implied in course descriptions? Consider the broader picture and reconstruct for yourself how you came to your observations, and use this to help you to create a coherent introduction and thesis. A good working thesis is your guide. So those writers who understand the concept of a working thesis are way ahead of the game. A working thesis is a thesis that works for you, helping you to see where your ideas are going. Many students keep their thesis sentence in front of them at all times to help them control the direction of their argument. I recommend typing it out, pasting it up on your computer on the wall where next to where you're working, having it on the top of your notebook page if you're keeping notes. Keep it handy so you can always refer back to that, because it's easy to get off topic or forget what exactly you're arguing once you get going sometimes in your writing. So if you have it right there, it can guide you. So always return to that working thesis, give it a critical once over. As you write your essay, as you do more research, you may find that you want to adjust your thesis statement. That's why we call it a working thesis. It will change over time. You may find something interesting through your research that will change your argument, or that will be a main point maybe you did not consider. So stay in conversation with your thesis throughout the writing process, and you might be surprised what you can learn from that. So constructing the thesis. Consider again how you came to your argument in the first place. So really, it's brainstorming. Really think out your consideration of that argument and how you came to believe this, that you're whatever the topic it is that you're writing about. So, for example, I'm going to give you an example of a literary analysis essay. So we'll just imagine that you're writing an essay for a literature course, and you have to write about a novel. And throughout this novel, you have identified that the image of women putting on lipstick reappears throughout the novel. It's seemingly insignificant, but it's repetitive, and you've picked up on that, so you'd like to explore that. So you've noticed that's happening throughout the book. You've also noticed that lipstick stains abound in the novel. They're on glasses, sheets, and so on. So not only is it there always scenes of women putting on lipstick, but it's throughout the novel in other ways as well. And finally, you've noticed that the women characters in the novel use lipstick in different ways. Character A puts lipstick on alone in the bathroom in front of the mirror. Character B puts lipstick on in front of others, but only when they seem on the verge of rejecting her. Character C delights in seeing her incriminating lipstick smears on the shirts and sheets of her lover. Character D wears lipstick only when she goes out to have lunch with her ex-lover as a way of exaggerating the grimace of her pain. So for these observations, you see a pattern at work. Characters A and B are using lipstick to mask themselves and their feelings. Characters C and D use it to unmask themselves or others. You also notice that the author seems to admire characters C and D for their insistence that emotions be revealed. So you think you have a good idea for a thesis sentence, and you give it a go. Your thesis may look something like this. In the novel, the character's seemingly insignificant use of lipstick in fact points to one of the novel's larger themes, the masking and unmasking of self. So the sentence does mirror for the reader your own process of discovery. It begins with an observation, which you first recognized in the novel, that the seemingly insignificant use of lipstick, often appears, and that it in fact is connected to a larger theme. And then you classifies those meanings into two categories. In other words, some of your logic is indeed present in the thesis you've written. You notice that I said some of your logic. It's important to take a second look at this thesis to see what has been left out. Always consider your reader. Put yourself in the place of the reader. What does the thesis sentence tell you about the structure of the argument to come? As it is now, it doesn't present a very solid structure. With this thesis statement as a potential reader, I would expect that first, the writer will provide evidence that lipstick is indeed an important symbol in the novel. Second, I would expect the writer to argue that lipstick signifies a character's desire to mask herself, a common observation. And finally, I would expect the writer to show me how exactly lipstick is used to reveal the self. Then you must ask yourself what the thesis doesn't tell the reader about the argument to come. We understand as readers that this paper is going to be about the masking and unmasking of the self. We understand, because it is common knowledge, that lipstick can be used to create a mask. But how, precisely, does lipstick unmask the self? That's a portion that's missing in this thesis statement. Here you're pointing to some uncommon use of lipstick, but you haven't hinted at what that uncommon use is, or why it's important. So the questions you need to ask yourself in writing that thesis statement are not only what is your claim, but how is that claim being brought about? And why is it important? So always ask yourself, does your thesis give the reader a sense of the real argument to come? In this case, it doesn't. However, it doesn't mean that the thesis sentence is useless. You have to start somewhere, right? In fact, even though this thesis doesn't provide the reader with a very good map of the essay, it does help you, the writer, to see the overall structure of your argument. In other words, it's a good working thesis sentence for your paper. So again, ask yourself these questions. What does it tell the reader to expect? And those are the points that I previously mentioned with this lipstick example. All right, you need to ask questions. As I said, continue to ask questions throughout your writing process. What doesn't the thesis statement tell the reader? Always ask yourself that. And look closely at your thesis and ask yourself the hard question. That hard question. Does it really tell the reader what's to come? So your working thesis statement. Again, as I previously mentioned, it makes the work of writing your essay a lot easier if you have that thesis statement and you recognize that it will change over time. What you start with will most likely not be your final thesis statement, but let it be your guide. So revising your thesis statement. How exactly is the writer using lipstick and masks to reveal the character, and what precisely is his point in doing so? Those are some of the questions you might ask yourself if you were writing that thesis statement. And here are some examples, and I'll let you read these. It's showing the process of moving from a working thesis to a more developed thesis. This example is quite long, and you'll see that it would be best to move from a one-sentence thesis to a two-sentence thesis statement. Number 2 breaks it up for the reader, and it becomes a lot clearer, the argument. So this number 2 would be a good example of a thesis statement. Again, ask yourself those questions. Don't forget the what and the how questions. What exactly are you trying to say? And how are you presenting the argument? and does the thesis statement present the logic and the structure for your paper? Does it emphasize the points that you want to emphasize? So this would be an example of a very solid thesis statement. And it's about 3 sentences long. They don't have to be that long, but if you are working with a lot of information, you can expand it to be that long. You're not limited to 1 sentence. It can be 1 sentence, but it doesn't have to be. On to paragraphs, and away from the lipstick example. It was fun trying to find the clip art for that one. All right, when you're writing the body paragraphs for your essay, consider the job of each paragraph. It's important. Every paragraph needs to be significant. The reader expects that you will declare a point and then offer support for that point. So each point, and each paragraph will have a main point. Each main point needs to connect clearly back to your thesis statement. After you've developed your thesis statement, it's always good to make a little rough outline so you know what points you're going to make, what order you're going to use, what kind of organization. If a single paragraph is weak, the entire argument could fail. So it's important to consider the significance of each paragraph and what you want that paragraph to do. Don't allow it just to go off topic. You do not want to confuse or irritate the reader. A paragraph is generally understood as a single unit of the paper. What your reader expects when he or she enters the paragraph is that he or she is going to hear you declare a point and then offer support for that point. If you violate that expectation, and if your paragraphs wander aimlessly among a half-dozen points, or if they declare points without offering significant evidence to support those points, the reader will become confused or irritated by your argument. He or she will not want to read any further. The design of the essay, the point of the essay is to sell your argument. You're trying to win over the reader. So if you have a weak paragraph and you lose the reader's attention and their desire to read on, then your argument is weak. You've essentially lost the argument at that point. So, what should the paragraph do? Your paragraph needs to be supportive. A supportive paragraph's main idea clearly develops the argument of the thesis. It also needs to be strong. A strong paragraph develops the main idea using sufficient evidence. And it needs to be considerate. A considerate paragraph is a coherent paragraph. It makes sense within the text as a whole. So again, it needs to be supportive because it needs to connect clearly back to the thesis statement, your central argument. It needs to be strong because it has to have enough evidence within the paragraph to prove that main point, which will prove your argument. And it needs to be considerate. It needs to connect to your other points clearly. You can do this by using transitions. Work on having a concluding sentence in each paragraph which sums up the main point and then gives a nod to the main point to come in the next paragraph. It will connect then directly to the topic sentence of the next paragraph. Topic sentences are very important. I recommend as you begin here to put that topic sentence right at the beginning of the body paragraph. This will help keep you organized. As you get more comfortable with your writing, you can place topic sentences elsewhere in the paragraph, but until that point, I would recommend keeping them as that first sentence in the paragraph. Make sure your topic sentence declares a single point of your argument. Some people, I've run across this error frequently of putting quotes in your topic sentence. You want to have your voice present in the topic sentence. So do not use quotes in your topic sentences or your concluding sentences. Does the topic sentence further your argument? Again, make sure they all connect back to your argument. This is when it comes in handy to have that outline. Is there a clear relationship between the topic sentence and the paragraph that came before? Again, using those concluding sentences and transitions helps this. Does the topic sentence control your paragraph? So you want to make sure you have that main point and you don't go off topic then throughout the paragraph. And like I said, consider where you're placing the topic sentence. I think as you begin here, the best thing is to place it as the first sentence in your paragraph. Introductions. The purpose of the introduction is to inform and intrigue. You want to draw your reader in. The introductory paragraphs and conclusions can be some of the most challenging paragraphs you write because they need to do more than simply state a topic sentence and offer support. They need to be more persuasive and synthesize and provide context for your entire argument. And they must also make the proper impression upon your reader. Your introduction is your chance then to get your reader interested in your subject. Accordingly, the tone of the paragraph has to be just right. The papers you're writing this class are all academic papers, so you need to maintain an academic tone. That means you're using a more formal kind of language. If you want to inform, but not to the point of being dull, you want to intrigue, but not to the point of being vague, you want to take a strong stance, but not alienate your reader. So pay attention to the nuances of your tone. Again, you want to be persuasive, but you don't want to alienate your reader. Seek out a second reader if you're not sure you've managed to get the tone the way you want it. It's always a good idea to have someone else read your writing and get suggestions. So you want to announce your topic broadly, then declare your particular take. For example, if you're interested in talking about the narrator in Virginia Woolf's novels, you might say, Woolf's narrator posed a problem for many of her critics. A definition of the problem you would discuss, declare your thesis statement. You want to place the argument in context. So if you were discussing gun control in America, something specific about that, you would maybe discuss a little bit of the history of gun control in America and also the current dialogue going on about gun control. Provide any background material important to your argument. So if you're talking about something historically, again, if we use that example of gun control, perhaps you want to state previous laws in history. What was the first gun control law? The amendment in the Constitution, things like that. If American society, how things have changed, why it was important originally, why it's important now, why it might not be as important, depending on your argument. you want to give that background information to let the reader know where your argument fits. Define key terms as you intend to make use of them in your argument. So let's say you're writing a philosophy paper on the nature of reality. It's absolutely essential that you define the term for your reader. So how do you understand the term reality in the context of the paper? Empirically, rationally, begin with a definition of terms, and from there work towards the declaration of your argument. I'm working with some students right now in a literature course, and we read The Hunger Games. And many of them were writing about gender roles in the Hunger Games, and the hero of Katniss kind of being a traditional male type hero figure in the novel. It's not, you can't just say something about traditional gender roles. You need to define what exactly you would mean by traditional gender roles. They would have to do that in their argument. So that's one example. Make sure you define where your argument fits and what kind of perspective you have. A technique to draw your reader in is to use an anecdote or a quotation. This can be pretty effective. You might have a good little story or quotation that seems to reflect the main point of your paper. Don't be afraid to start with that. Be sure, however, that you tie that story or quotation clearly and immediately to the main argument of your paper. And acknowledge your opponents. This is important in any argumentative essay, especially if you're writing a paper about a matter that's controversial. You might want to wish to begin by summarizing the point of view of your adversaries, then state your own position in opposition to theirs. In this way, you place yourself clearly in the ongoing conversation. That is one of the key elements of the introduction, is to place your argument within the ongoing conversation. Be careful, though, you don't want to make too convincing a case for the other side when you do address the opposition. Remember, your introduction is a first impression your argument will make on the reader. Take special care with your sentences so that they will be interesting. Also, take the time to consider who your readers are and what background they will bring with them to their reading. Because this is an online course, you will not get to know your audience that well. You have to take that into consideration. The audience will be your peers in the course and myself. Consider that it's people from a variety of backgrounds, and adjust your argument or your tone accordingly. And you may want to consider writing your introduction after you've written the rest of the paper, or go back and revise that introduction when you're done, and make sure that it's adequately presenting your argument and setting up the main points of your paper. So, conclusions. Conclusions are also very difficult to write. Students often tend to just summarize their thesis statement, and conclusions seem to be very short and not very effective. So I recommend trying to do more than that. Just as the introduction sought to place the paper in a larger ongoing conversation about the topic, so should the conclusion insist on returning the reader to that ongoing conversation, but with a feeling that they have learned something more. You don't want your reader to finish your paper and say, "So what?" Many of the strategies for your improving your introductions also apply to the conclusions, or the conclusion of your paper. Don't let that argument fall to pieces. Summarize your argument, but do more. Return to that ongoing conversation. Emphasize the importance of your own contribution to it. Why is this argument important? Consider the background information. You might want to return to that introduction and comment on some of that background information you provided. Now that you've laid out the points of your argument, return to those key terms you may have discussed. Also, go back to that anecdote or quote that you used in your introduction. This is a very effective way to tie it all together. Refer back to that, and now with the understanding, or the reader has the understanding that they've seen your argument, and discuss how it reflects your main idea. Again, acknowledge your opponents, but be careful with this. Again, with your tone, and don't give them too much leeway. You want to emphasize that you've beaten them in your conclusion. And remember, language is important to that conclusion. It's all about tone, persuasive tone. So hopefully this information has been informative and will be beneficial as you work on your essays in this course. Feel free to go back and take a look at this. If you get stuck, you can mute me so you don't have to listen to me again. But I like to do this for my online classes so you at least can hear my voice, because otherwise we're lost in cyberspace, and it's difficult to get to know each other. So it can be done. Essays can be daunting, but if you take the time, develop that thesis statement, write that rough outline for your main points, work on connecting your ideas, give special attention to that introduction and conclusion, it can be done. So I look forward to working with you all this semester, or this next 8 weeks. It's going to be a fast 8 weeks. And again, go back and review this if you feel you need to.